For most of human history, whether you lived through the winter was decided in a single week of autumn, the week of the harvest. If it came in, you ate. If it failed, a drought, a late frost, too much rain, a blight in the crop, there was no store to go to. No truck bringing food from somewhere the weather had been kinder. There was only what you had grown sitting in your own barn, and you already knew, the day you brought it in, whether it would be enough. And when it wasn't, people did not starve suddenly. They starved slowly, on purpose. They rationed what little they had, stretched it thinner week by week, ate the grain meant for next spring's planting, then the animals, then things that were not really food at all. They watched it run out through the coldest months, counting down, knowing exactly how it would end. For most of that history, people starved because the food to save them could not reach them. It didn't exist nearby, and there was no way to bring it from far. But then, twice, once in the 19th century and once within living memory, something worse became clear. Sometimes the food could reach them, and it was sent away instead. This is the story of both kinds of hunger, the kind the world could not prevent, and the kind it chose not to. To understand how fragile survival was, you have to understand how narrow the margin actually was between a normal year and a deadly one. It was one season, sometimes one storm. For most of human history, there was no global food trade, no way to preserve food at scale, and for most families, no reserve to fall back on. You ate what your own land produced, in the season it produced it, and you made it last until the next harvest came in. That was the whole system. The gap between running out of last year's food and bringing in this year's was the most dangerous stretch of the calendar, and it had names in many languages: the hungry gap, the lean season. In a good year, you crossed it thin but alive. But the harvest was at the mercy of things no one could control. A drought could wither the crop in the field. A wet summer could rot it. An early frost could kill it weeks before it was ready. A blight could turn a whole crop black in the ground in days, and there was no second source. If your harvest failed, you could not simply buy food from a region where it hadn't, because the food could not travel far enough, fast enough, before it spoiled. And you likely had nothing to buy it with anyway. So people watched the sky the way we watch nothing now. The weather was not small talk. It was the difference between a winter you survived and a winter that emptied your village. Every farming family lived one bad season from the edge, and they knew it. And they had known it their whole lives because their parents had lived on the same edge and their parents before them. Hunger was not a rare catastrophe. It was the constant possibility that shaped everything: where you settled, how much land you worked, how many children you could feed, how much you set aside, and how much you dared to eat. When the harvest did fail, what followed was not fast. That is the part we forget. Starvation was a slow, deliberate arithmetic that a family did to itself, trying to stretch too little food across too much winter. First, you cut the portions. Everyone ate less, and you measured what was left against the months still to come, doing the terrible math of how thin you could make it go. Then, you started eating the things you were not supposed to touch. The seed grain, the portion set aside to plant next spring, was sacred, because eating it meant mortgaging the next harvest to survive this winter. Hungry enough, families ate it anyway, and in doing so, guaranteed that even if they lived to spring, the next year would be hungrier still. Then the animals that were meant to be kept, the milk cow, the breeding stock, the future of the farm, went into the pot. And when that was gone, people ate things that were barely food. Bark ground and boiled to stretch what flour remained. Grass, nettles, roots dug from frozen ground. In some places, blood drawn from living animals, taken a little at a time so the animal survived to give more. These were not strange customs. They were what human beings do when the food runs out and the body will try anything to keep going one more week. And through all of it, the weakest went first. The very young, whose small bodies had no reserve. The very old. the already sick. A famine did not take a village all at once. It took it in an order, slowly, over months, and everyone could see who was next. Parents watched children fade, knowing exactly what was happening, and having nothing to stop it, because the only thing that would have stopped it was food, and there was no food. That was the reality behind the word starvation. Not a sudden event, but a long, visible arithmetic decline, endured by people who could count exactly how much was left and how long it would last. Everything so far has described one kind of famine, the oldest kind. The harvest fails, and there is no way to bring food from anywhere else because food cannot travel and there is none to spare nearby. That kind of famine was often terrible, and it was often made worse by human hands, by wars that burned the fields, by sieges that starved a city on purpose, by rulers who taxed away the grain the poor needed to survive. Hunger was rarely purely natural, even in the deep past, but underneath all of it lay a hard physical limit. Even when people wanted to help, the food usually could not be moved in time to matter. The world was, in the most basic sense, unable to feed the starving from a distance. And then came a kind of famine that was not about that limit at all. A kind where the food could reach the starving, and did not, because it was sent somewhere else. Ireland, beginning in 1845, a blight destroyed the potato crop that Ireland's poor lived on almost entirely. It came back year after year through the second half of the decade. Roughly 1 million people died. More than 1 million more left the country to survive, crowding onto ships in conditions so lethal they came to be called coffin ships, dying of fever and hunger on the crossing. But here is what makes the Irish famine different from every famine that came before it. Ireland was not a land with no food. Throughout those years, the country went on producing grain, cattle, and butter, and went on shipping it out. Food left Irish ports, sometimes under guard, past people who were starving, loaded onto boats bound for other markets, while the people who had grown it died along the roads and in the fields. The relief existed. It was grown on the same soil. It could travel, and it did travel, away from the mouths that needed it. What stood between the starving and the food was not distance, or spoilage, or the limits of a cart. It was who had the legal claim to it and who did not. The economist Amartya Sen spent his life studying famines, and his conclusion was that they are rarely about how much food exists in a place. They are about who has the right to obtain it. People can starve in a country with full granaries if they have no claim on what the granaries hold. Ireland was a searing proof of that idea. People did not die because there was no food. They died beside food that was leaving. Picture a family too weak to stand, watching a cart of grain roll down the road toward the harbor. That is a different kind of horror than a failed field. A failed field is the world being unable to help. That cart was the world being able, and turning away, a result not of the weather, but of human systems of ownership and trade and law. And if that had happened only once, in one country, in the distant past, it might be possible to think of it as a terrible exception. It was not an exception. It happened again, closer to us than most people realize. 1943. Not the distant past, within the lifetime of people still alive today. In Bengal, in British-ruled India, during the Second World War, somewhere between 2 and 3 million people starved to death. And they starved for reasons that had almost nothing to do with a failed harvest. The rice crop that year was not catastrophically short. Bengal in 1943 was not a land emptied of food. What happened was a collapse of who could obtain it. The war had disrupted the region. Imports of rice from neighboring Burma had been cut off when it fell to Japanese forces. Prices spiraled as fear and speculation took hold, and wartime policy prioritized feeding soldiers, workers, and cities, seen as essential to the war effort over the rural poor. Food was moved, held, and sold according to the needs of a war, and the people at the bottom, landless laborers, the rural poor, simply lost the ability to buy any of it. The price of rice climbed beyond their reach, and then they died, in the fields, and on the roads, and in the streets of Calcutta, in a province that still had rice in it. This was, in fact, the famine that shaped Amartya Sen's entire understanding. He was a child in Bengal in 1943, and he watched it happen. Decades later, studying it, he arrived at the insight that famine is about entitlement, not just supply, because he had seen a famine where the food was there and the people still starved, because they had lost every means of laying claim to it. The point of Bengal is not to assign blame to any one person. That remains argued over, and it is not the work of this story to settle it. The point is harder and more important than blame. It is that the second kind of famine, the kind where food exists and does not reach the starving, is not a relic of a crueler, older world. It happened in the 20th century. It happened during a war that people remember, and in various forms, driven by conflict and politics, and the deliberate withholding of food. It has kept happening since. The famine of incapacity, the failed harvest with no relief possible, is largely behind us. The famine of distribution and power is not. So what changed and what didn't? Because something genuinely did change, and it is worth being precise about exactly what. The oldest famine, the local harvest failing with no way to bring food from elsewhere, has largely been broken, and by something almost mundane. Food learned to travel, railways and steamships, and, later, trucks and refrigerated ships could move grain across a continent or an ocean before it spoiled, which meant that for the first time, a harvest failing in one place could be answered by a harvest that had succeeded in another. Preservation stretched how far and how long food could go. Farming itself changed, raising yields beyond anything earlier generations could grow. Your winter no longer depended entirely on your own field, because if your crop failed, food could come from somewhere it hadn't. That is a real and enormous victory, and it is worth naming honestly. The specific terror that shaped almost all of human history, that a bad season on your own land meant a slow death with no help possible, has, for most of the world, been defeated. The technology to feed the starving from a distance now exists, where for all of history it did not. But that victory only ever touched the first kind of famine. It did nothing to the second. Moving food across the world does not help people who have no claim on the food that arrives. When famine strikes now, it is almost never because the food does not exist or cannot be brought. It is because war blocks the roads, or a government withholds supplies, or a collapse strips people of any means to buy what is sitting in the market. The food is there, or could be there. The problem is the same one Ireland revealed and Bengal confirmed, that having food in a place and having a claim on it are two different things, and people die in the gap between them. So we did not solve hunger, we solved half of it. The older, more natural, more forgivable half. The half that remains is the one that was never about the harvest at all. Walk into any supermarket in the dead of winter. The shelves are full. There is fruit that grew in a hemisphere where it is currently summer, grain from a continent you will never visit, food from a dozen countries stacked in one aisle, and you will not think about a single harvest that produced any of it. You have never once wondered whether the harvest came in. It is not a question you have ever had to ask. For almost all of human history, it was the only question that mattered. The harvest was the line between living and starving, and its failure meant a slow death you could watch approaching for months, in an order from the weakest first. That particular fear, the fear of your own field failing with no help possible, is one that you and almost everyone you know will never feel. And that is one of the quietest, largest achievements of the modern world. But do not mistake it for the end of hunger. The full shelf in January means the old famine cannot reach you. It does not mean famine is over. Somewhere in the world, right now, food is sitting in a market or a warehouse or a port, while people who cannot claim it starve within reach of it, not because the harvest failed, but because power decided the food would go elsewhere, exactly as it decided in Ireland, exactly as it decided in Bengal. We have forgotten what it meant to live one harvest from starvation, and we are right to have forgotten it, because for us, it is genuinely gone. What has not gone is the harder, older cruelty underneath it, that the food can exist and still not reach the mouth that needs it. That was the deadliest famine of all, and it is the one we have not yet solved. If you've ever wondered how the safety you live inside was built, and where its edges still are, that's what this channel is for. Subscribe and we'll keep uncovering the world that came before the one you know, and the parts of it that are still here.